I was directed to a list of questions by Dr. Ken Hovind, who put out a series of questions for evolutionists. I figured I'd give this one a shot. It's basically a gish gallop, asking as many questions as possible, not looking for answers, but trying to overwhelm any opposition by asking a large number of questions all at once. So, in the interest of brevity, I will attempt to answer them in a brief manner as well. Some of them are even the same question asked different ways, so I'll answer those ones together. Oh, and usually I try to be respectful when I do these. Even people who I've replied to like this have mentioned how they like I am at least polite when I'm responding. So, if I sounded a bit sarcastic when mentioning Mr. Hovind's title, that was deliberate. Anybody who gets their doctorate from a diploma mill and whose thesis starts with, "Hi, my name is," deserves a bit of sarcasm. I'm an idiot, and even I know that just isn't done in academia. The test of any theory is whether or not it provides answers to basic questions. Some well-meaning but misguided people think that evolution is a reasonable theory to explain man's questions about the universe. Evolution is not a good theory, it is just a pagan religion masquerading as science. No. The test of a theory is if it fits with current known information, is not falsified by any facts, and has predictive capabilities. Evolution confirms to all of these, making it a good and accepted theory. It is not a religion. It is derived from observations we have made and conclusions we have drawn from those observations. Where did the space for the universe come from? Where did matter come from? We don't know. That's an honest answer. The best we have so far is there was an expansion of the universe about 14 or so billion years ago. But since we don't have any evidence for what caused it, I don't know is the best, and so far only answer we can give. There is no evidence for an intelligent creator being, so we really have no reason to think that one was the cause. Also, what does this have to do with evolution? Where did the laws of the universe come from? Gravity, inertia, etc. The laws of the universe are what we have observed on how matter acts and reacts to other matter. They were not written separately into the universe. They are just principles that we have recognized when studying matter. How did matter get so perfectly organized? Usually by gravity. Gravity causes every piece of matter to react to every other one, albeit at such a small rate as distances increase to be barely noticeable. It causes the same force to be applied to every piece of matter, thereby organizing it. Where did the energy come from to do all the organizing? Gravity can be recognized as negative energy. The zero-energy universe hypothesis says that the total amount of energy in the universe is zero. Positive energy is cancelled out by the negative energy of gravity.
How can you create a universe from nothing? Well, if you calculate the total matter of the universe, it is positive. If you calculate the total energy of the universe, it is negative because of gravity. Gravity has negative energy. When you add the two together, what do you get? Zero. So it takes no energy to create a universe.
Again, none of these questions so far have anything to do with biological evolution. When, where, why, and how did life come from dead matter? Jeremy English has hypothesized that the second law of thermodynamics could itself be the cause of life. Certain molecule combinations will replicate themselves as a way to dissipate excess heat energy, which will cause self-replicating sphere clusters. This could be what is considered the basic start of life. When, where, why, and how did life learn to replicate itself? Life did not learn to do anything. No matter how they started, self-replicating molecules are not doing anything consciously, but simply following the laws of physical matter. With what did the first cell capable of sexual reproduction reproduce? The proto-sexual reproduction would be simple organisms sharing genetic information, which is selected for because it results in more diversity. As organisms became more complex, this genetic information sharing became more complex as well. Eventually this led to dedicated organs used for sharing genetic data, and eventually resulted in the sexual specialization with males and females. Why would any plant or animal want to reproduce more of its kind, since this would only make more mouths to feed and decrease the chance of survival? Does the individual have a drive to survive, or the species? How do you explain this? If an organism did not reproduce, it would eventually die, ending its line. The ones that kept reproducing would be the ones that have descendants that survive and continue to reproduce. So, natural selection selects for creatures that reproduce. The individual needs to survive, but if it doesn't also reproduce, the species will die off. It would be like this. If two creatures were competing, and one had offspring and the other didn't, then, when the current generation died off, only the species that had offspring would be left. How can mutations, recombining of the genetic code, create any new, improved varieties? Recombining English letters will never produce Chinese books. Mutations are small changes between parents and offspring. The small changes are kept if the creature survives, and are weeded out if they are detrimental to the creature. Small changes, over time, add up to new, improved species. Language is a decent simile for evolution. When speakers of the same language are separated, the languages change over time. Accents and specific words, for example. With enough time, languages become different enough that the two speakers from different languages are unable to communicate with each other. In the same way, similar creatures, if separated for enough generations, will have small changes that add up, and eventually their descendants will be unable to breed. But convergence is highly improbable. Two species unable to breed will be unlikely to evolve descendants that can. In the same way, one language like English will unlikely change over time to an already existing one like Chinese. Is it possible that similarities in design between different animals prove a common creator instead of a common ancestor? Both are possible, but the fact is we have no evidence for a creator, and we do have evidence that organisms change over generations, so a common ancestor is the more likely explanation, and the only theory that fits with our current knowledge base. Natural selection only works with the genetic information available, and tends only to keep a species stable. How would you explain the increasing complexity in the genetic code that must have occurred if evolution were true? As new generations are born, the genetic code is changed slightly. Humans themselves have about 60 to 120 mutations between our generations. As the more fit organisms are preferred by natural selection, the slight changes can quickly add up over several generations and become quite complex. Oh, and natural selection doesn't keep a species stable, it selects for the best able to survive. When, where, why, and how did single-celled plants become multicelled? Where are the 2- and 3-celled intermediates? As they became more complex, single-celled organisms mutated, and some cells did not split completely. These multicellular creatures were able to have some cells specialized to do more for the organism, helping it thrive. The more complex 2- and 3-celled intermediates were edged out by even more complex ones, while single-celled organisms were simple enough not to have to compete with the complex creatures. Single-celled animals evolve from even more simple self-replicating molecules. Very simple self-replicating molecular structures eventually became the first single-celled organisms. Fish changed to amphibians. Amphibians changed to reptiles. Some fish started spending more and more time out of the water, either to escape predators or find food sources without much competition. They became more specialized over the generations to be able to spend longer and longer periods out of the water until they could survive in both environments, making them amphibious. An example of a water-based life form that became amphibious is the mud skipper. No, that's a mudkip. Okay, better. The environment that the proto-mudskipper lived in began to slowly dry up, so their ancestors had to spend more and more time out of the water, causing a pressure to be able to survive in both environments. Eventually, the amphibians became so specialized in living out of the water they could not breathe while in it, and were the precursors to reptiles. Reptiles changed to birds. The lungs, bones, eyes, reproductive organs, heart, method of locomotion, body covering, etc. were all very different. How do the intermediate forms live? They're not actually all that different. The bone structure of two-legged dinosaurs, like raptors and T-Rex, while much larger, are very similar to birds, not to mention also being hollow. Feathers were used for insulation for themselves or their eggs. The lungs, reproductive organs, and heart are almost exactly the same in birds as reptiles, and the locomotion, at least using their legs, is also identical to the theropod dinosaurs. The changes were small enough that the intermediate forms lived better than their ancestors, but were edged out by their descendants. For instance, one of my professors speculated that feathers also help smaller protobirds catch bugs, like a rough net in their arms. When, where, why, how, and from what did whales evolve? From land mammals that returned to the water. Their ancestors spent more and more time in the water, either to escape predators or find sources of food, until they specialized enough to only be able to live in the water. Seahorses evolve, most likely from a common ancestor of the pipefish, which looks like stretched out seahorses. The upright posture and curvy tail means the seahorse can latch onto vegetation and wait for prey to come to it. Hunters know it's easier to wait for prey to come to them, rather than having to chase after it. Bats evolve from tree-dwelling rodents. Growing a way to fall in a more controlled manner would have helped them survive, and that ability evolved into actual flight. Onychonceros phaneri, a recently discovered ancestor to bats, showed that their flight evolved before their echolocation. Eyes evolve, light-sensitive patches on the skin. Very simple photoreceptors provided a great advantage to reacting to the world, even if it's just telling the difference between light and dark. These organisms thrived, and these patches became more specific, specialized, and complex, resulting in eyes. Ears evolve. In the same way that detecting light helped organisms survive, noticing vibrations around them also helped early organisms. This detection eventually became specialized as ears. Hair, skin, feathers, scales, nails, claws, etc. evolve. Adding the etc. shows you really aren't interested in an answer. You're just throwing as much as you can to try to cloud the issue. Each of these, hair, skin, feathers, scales, nails, and claws, evolve slowly to help protect, usually through insulation, or attack. Predators with claws will usually have a better chance of taking down prey than similar ones that don't. And in the same way, animals that have protection from the elements or predators have a better chance to survive than those that don't. Which evolved first? How and how long did it work without the others? The digestive system, the food to be digested, the appetite, the ability to find and eat the food, the digestive juices, or the body's resistance to its own digestive juices, stomach, intestines, etc. The food. Organisms that would become prey existed first, and others developed ways to take advantage of this source of energy, mainly by devouring them. The drive to reproduce, or the ability to reproduce? The ability. The first self-replicating molecules didn't have any drive or desire to do anything. They just replicated themselves without any conscious thought about doing it. The lungs, the mucus lining to protect them, the throat, or the perfect mixture of gases to be breathed into the lungs. The gases. Early organisms took advantage of the environment around them to thrive, developing organs, such as permeable membranes, to use what was available and abundant. DNA or RNA to carry the DNA messages to cell parts. RNA. It's much simpler and developed first. DNA, while more complex, is more stable and able to create more complex organisms, and in all likelihood came about later. The termite, or the flagella in its intestines that actually digest the cellulose. First off, I assume you meant the flagellate protists in the termite's intestines, not flagella. Otherwise the question doesn't make any sense. This is a case of symbiotic evolution. Not all termites have the flagellate protists, although most do. The original termites probably ate protists that could help them get more nitrogen from the cellulose, and thrived. The bacteria within them thrived as well, since they were protected and fed by the termite and evolved to survive in the gut better. They evolved enough to become specialized and dependent on each other. In the same way, we have bacteria in our guts that we need to help us digest foods more efficiently. The plants, or the insects that live on and pollinate the plants. Again, this is symbiotic evolution. Some plants begin to pollinate simply by letting their pollen loose in the atmosphere, and some would drift to similar plants. Very inefficient, but was the best they could do. Insects would occasionally take the pollen with them, and were able to spread it further. Plants developed a way to attract the insects, so they would be more likely to take and spread the pollen. Both plants and insects evolved to become dependent on each other, helping both thrive. The bones, ligaments, tendons, blood supply, or muscles to move the bones. The blood supply. Fluids and cells, which could be considered blood, came about long before any of the other parts you mentioned. The nervous system, repair system, or hormone system. I was actually wrong about this. I originally thought it was the nervous system that developed first. While making this, I learned that paracrine signaling, a hormonal system, did not only develop before the nervous system, but was one of the first things that early organisms developed at all, even before light detecting patches. I learned new information and was able to update my understanding of the world. That is part of what being intellectually honest means. The immune system, or the need for it. The need for it. As parasites invaded complex creatures, the ones that developed the ability to fight off such invaders were able to survive, and edge out the ones that did not develop any kind of response to the attackers. So, there you go. Like I said, I actually learned something new while making this, giving me a better knowledge of how the world works. As always, if any of you find something you think I should go over, please send it my way.